Your hands are cracking open. The skin splits at the knuckles. It bleeds in the cold. You've tried every lotion on the shelf and nothing holds. But my grandmother never once bought a tube of lotion from a store, and her hands were softer than anyone I knew. She used a 4-ingredient salve, a recipe over 150 years old, hidden in Amish family journals, rediscovered in 2019 by Pennsylvania Historical Society researchers combing through archived manuscripts. Then, on a January night, she pressed a small tin into my palm and said nothing else needed saying. By the end of this, you will have the exact formula, every ingredient, and the method that heals cracked skin overnight. The same one modern skincare buried. The winter of 1789 did not forgive weakness. Amish settlers pushing into Lancaster County, Pennsylvania, faced temperatures that split wood and froze wells solid. Cracked skin was not a cosmetic inconvenience. It was a survival problem. Open fissures on working hands meant infection. Infection on a homestead meant you could not work. And if you could not work, your family did not eat. There were no pharmacies, no commercial creams, no supply wagons carrying imported remedies. What healed you came from what you already had. Lard rendered from the smokehouse pig. Beeswax pulled from the hive behind the barn. Herbs dried from the kitchen garden in autumn. These were not exotic ingredients. They were the ingredients of daily life, repurposed with precision and passed between neighbors without ceremony, the way useful things always travel in close communities. By the early 1800s, Amish communities moving into Ohio's harsher interior winters had refined the formula further, specifically targeting severe winter fissuring, the deep, bleeding cracks that formed at the fingertips and heels of field workers who spent their days gripping frozen tool handles and hauling water through drifts that came up past the knee. Community healers documented results in careful handwriting by candlelight, the quill scratching against rough paper while the tallow candle guttered in the draft from the window frame. Families passed the recipe through handwritten journals, not storefronts, not catalogs, not the internet. For over 150 years, this formula lived entirely inside family collections and community records. Then the manuscripts surfaced. How does someone go from a handwritten journal entry to a rediscovered healing standard? In 2019, researchers at the Pennsylvania Historical Society began cataloging a collection of archived Amish household manuscripts, domestic records, planting guides, remedy logs, donated by families in Lancaster and Holmes counties. Inside those pages, they found it. A salve recipe appearing across multiple unrelated family collections, recorded in consistent detail, with consistent results. The same base ingredients, the same preparation method, the same reported outcome. Cracked skin, healed overnight. The researchers noted something else too. The handwriting changed across generations. The ink changed, the paper changed, but the formula did not. Not in any meaningful way. Whatever these families were doing, they had decided it was correct, and they had stopped experimenting. That kind of consensus, across unrelated households, across state lines, across more than a century, is not coincidence. It is evidence. Two names kept surfacing in those records: Amos Byler and Rebecca Lapp. Amos Byler was an Amish elder and traditional healer operating out of Lancaster County in the mid to late 1800s. He was not a physician in any licensed sense. He was something older than that, a keeper of practical knowledge. The Byler family collection, a set of handwritten household remedy journals spanning 3 generations, contained the most complete version of the Salve formula found in the archived manuscripts. Amos had not invented the recipe. He had preserved it, copied it carefully, added margin notes on sourcing and seasonal variation. His entries specified lard rendered from leaf fat, not back fat, because the texture was finer and the absorption was cleaner. He noted beeswax ratios by weight, not by eye. He recorded which lavender harvest produced the strongest oil and which years the calendula grew too wet to yield good resin. He noted the exact month to harvest calendula flowers, mid-July, before the petals began to curl at the edges, when the resin content was at its peak and the color was still a deep saturated orange, rather than the faded yellow of an overripe bloom. He wrote about the smell of properly rendered lard, how it should carry almost no odor at all, and how any hint of rancidity meant the heat had run too high and the batch should be discarded without hesitation. He described the way good lard felt between the thumb and forefinger, slick but not greasy, vanishing into the skin within seconds rather than sitting on the surface in a shiny film. These were not casual observations. This was the documentation of a man who understood that precision mattered and who had watched imprecision fail people he cared about. Rebecca Lapp worked roughly in the same era, identified in the records as a community herbalist in an Ohio settlement. Her contribution was different. Where Byler preserved the formula, Lapp tested it. Her family records contain what researchers described as case-style notations, specific individuals, specific conditions, specific outcomes. A farmhand with fissured heels so deep they bled through his work socks every morning, leaving dark stains on the wool that his wife had to scrub out by hand in cold water. A mother with cracked nursing hands that had not closed in 6 weeks, the skin around her knuckles so tight she could not fully open her fingers without reopening the wounds. An elder with winter eczema spreading across both forearms, raw and weeping at the creases of the wrists, the skin so inflamed it radiated heat you could feel from an inch away. In each entry, Lapp recorded the application method, the number of nights used, and the result. She noted when a patient applied too little and saw slower progress. She noted when someone used the salve over unwashed skin and the outcome was worse. She was controlling for variables. Read that again. She was running informal clinical documentation in the 1870s inside a handwritten journal on a homestead in Ohio, with no training in research methodology and no awareness that what she was doing had a name. And that wasn't even the part that got people angry. What frustrated modern dermatologists reviewing the 2019 findings was simpler than that. The outcomes Lapp recorded, significant healing within 1 to 3 overnight applications, matched what researchers now understand about occlusive skin repair. Lard creates a breathable barrier. Beeswax locks moisture against the skin surface. The combination mimics the function of the stratum corneum, the skin's outermost protective layer. Lapp did not have that vocabulary, but she had the results. And the results were, by any honest measure, better than what most commercial products deliver today. In 2023, Amish Heritage Press published the Baylor Family Recipe Collection, a curated volume drawing from the archived manuscripts and related family records. It was not a mass-market release. It was a preservation project, but it moved the formula from archival obscurity into documented public record. Researchers, herbalists, and traditional medicine practitioners took notice. The salve was not a fringe remedy practiced by one isolated family. It was a community standard, documented independently across multiple family lines in multiple states over more than a century. The Pennsylvania Historical Society's 2019 cataloging work had confirmed what the Amish communities already knew. This formula worked. It had always worked. The only reason most people had never heard of it was that the people who used it had no interest in selling it. In the years ahead, Amos Beeler's careful margin notes on lard sourcing would come back to haunt every mass-market moisturizer claiming to replicate natural skin repair. But that's getting ahead of the story. What nobody saw coming was how much the first ingredient, the one modern skincare spent decades telling you to avoid, would turn out to be the entire reason the formula worked. It is early morning in Lancaster County. A cast-iron pot sits over low heat on a wood-burning stove. The fat inside is melting slowly, carefully, the way it has been melted in this kitchen for 3 generations. The air smells faintly of nothing much at all, which is exactly how it should smell. A thin curl of steam rises from the surface and disappears before it reaches the ceiling. Outside, the temperature is below freezing. The fields are white and still. A rooster calls once from somewhere behind the barn, the sound muffled by the snow that has settled over everything like a held breath. Inside, the work is quiet and deliberate. The woman at the stove stirs once with a wooden spoon, checks the color of the liquid pooling at the edges of the fat, and sets the spoon back on the iron rest without hurrying. The stakes, though nobody in this farmhouse would use that word, are everything. What comes next is the part that still doesn't make sense, at least not if you've spent the last 20 years listening to the skincare industry tell you what belongs on your face. The first ingredient in the Amish Salve is rendered lard, not petroleum jelly, not dimethicone, not some lab-synthesized emollient with 17 syllables on the label. Lard. Pig fat. The same substance that modern cosmetic marketing spent the better part of the 20th century convincing you was primitive, dirty, and dangerous. And here is where the story takes its first turn, because the science, the actual peer-reviewed, published science, tells a completely different story. Human sebum, the oil your own skin produces to protect and moisturize itself, has a fatty acid profile: oleic acid, palmitic acid, stearic acid. You know what else has nearly identical concentrations of those same fatty acids? Rendered lard from pasture-raised pigs. The match is not approximate. It is close enough that dermatological researchers have noted the skin absorbs properly rendered lard with almost no barrier resistance, no greasy residue, no surface film. It absorbs because your skin recognizes it. Your skin has always recognized it. The industry just never told you that. This decision seemed small at the time. It wasn't. Because while commercial skincare was building its entire moisturizing empire on petroleum derivatives, mineral oil, petrolatum, paraffin, all byproducts of crude oil refining, the Amish communities of Lancaster County kept right on using lard. Not out of ignorance, out of knowledge. Generational knowledge that petroleum sits on top of the skin because the skin doesn't know what it is. It cannot absorb it. It can only be coated by it. And coating is not the same as healing. Coating is a performance. Lard is the real thing. But there is more. And this is the part that the dermatologists who've looked at this formula find genuinely remarkable. Unrefined, pasture-raised lard is not just fat. It is fat-soluble vitamins. Vitamin A, which drives cell turnover and collagen synthesis. Vitamin D, which modulates inflammation and supports barrier repair. Vitamin E, which neutralizes free radicals and protects damaged tissue. 3 vitamins, all critical for skin repair, all present in properly sourced lard, all destroyed by the hydrogenation process that turns raw lard into the shelf-stable white block you find at a grocery store. And that is the caveat that Rebecca Lapp's own handwritten notes make explicit, underlined twice in the margin of her preparation record. Store-bought hydrogenated lard will not work. Full stop. The hydrogenation process that gives commercial lard its long shelf life and solid texture, at room temperature, also strips out every beneficial compound that makes the ingredient worth using in the first place. It doesn't matter if the label says lard. If it has been hydrogenated, it is nutritionally inert for skin purposes. It is, in a meaningful sense, not the same ingredient at all. The Amish method is different. It is slow. It is deliberate. It is the kind of process that cannot be scaled into a factory and still remain what it is. Leaf lard, the fat surrounding the kidneys of the pig, the purest and most neutral fat in the animal, is cut into small pieces and placed into a heavy pot over the lowest possible heat. No boiling. No rushing. The goal is to coax the fat out of the tissue without scorching it, without triggering any of the chemical changes that high heat causes. This process takes hours. You stand over the pot. You watch. You listen for the faintest sizzle that would indicate the temperature has crept too high. And when you hear it, you pull the pot to a cooler spot on the stove and wait for the sound to stop before sliding it back. The fat renders slowly, clarifying as it goes, turning from opaque white chunks into a clear golden liquid that smells faintly of nothing much at all. The cracklings settle to the bottom of the pot, pale and spent, and the fat above them is perfectly translucent, catching the light from the stove like shallow water over sand. When it cools, it sets into a smooth, white fat that is nothing like the compressed commercial block. It is alive, in the way that unprocessed whole foods are alive, carrying the nutritional complexity of the animal and the pasture it came from. The Baylor family rendered their own lard every autumn after the hog harvest. Amos Baylor's records from the 1860s note the specific timing, late October, after the first hard frost, when the fat was at its densest. He notes the source animals specifically, his own herd, pastured on open land, not grain-fed in confinement. This is not incidental. Pasture-raised pigs produce fat with measurably different nutritional profiles than confinement-raised animals. Higher in vitamin D, higher in anti-inflammatory omega-3 fatty acids relative to omega-6. The land the animal lived on becomes, in a very real sense, the medicine that ends up on your skin. So yeah, not great, as a description of what the commercial skincare industry handed the American consumer instead. Petroleum derivatives in a pretty bottle. A coating that mimics moisture without delivering it. A product that keeps you coming back because it never quite solves the problem, only manages it. The Amish weren't managing anything. They were fixing it. The formula worked because the base worked. The base worked because it matched what the skin already was. That is the logic, and it is almost embarrassingly simple once you see it. The skin is biological. It responds to biological inputs. Petroleum is geological. The skin has no idea what to do with it. But what nobody saw coming was how the second ingredient, something that has been misunderstood almost as badly as the first, and in almost entirely different ways, would take everything the lard was doing and lock it in place in a way that no synthetic barrier compound has ever been able to replicate. The hive is already working before sunrise. 40,000 bees, one colony. And somewhere inside the comb they've built, the ingredient that will become the second pillar of the Baylor-Lap formula is being produced at a rate of roughly 8 pounds of wax for every 100 pounds of honey. The bees don't know they're making medicine. But they are. Beeswax is not glamorous. It does not have the same dramatic reclamation story as lard. It has not been demonized by a century of industry marketing. But the version you've heard, the version where beeswax is just a thickener, just a texture agent, just the thing that gives a salve its solid form, that's not the full picture. Beeswax is an occlusive. That means it creates a physical barrier on the surface of the skin that slows transepidermal water loss. In plain language, it keeps moisture from evaporating out of the skin after you've applied the salve. The lard absorbs. The beeswax locks. Those are two completely different functions, and both of them are necessary. Without the lard, there is nothing meaningful to seal in. Without the beeswax, the moisture the lard delivers evaporates within hours. The formula is not additive. It is synergistic. Each ingredient does something the other cannot. But here is what most people don't know, and what the cosmetic industry has very little financial incentive to highlight. Beeswax is antimicrobial, naturally, inherently, because of its chemical composition. Studies going back decades have documented that beeswax inhibits the growth of Staphylococcus aureus, Salmonella enterica, Candida albicans, the same bacterial and fungal organisms that colonize cracked, broken skin and turn a painful fissure into an infected wound. The Amish didn't have this research. They had observation. They had generations of watching what happened when they used the salve and what happened when they didn't. The results spoke clearly enough. Now, the Baylor formula could have stopped there. It didn't. Because the ratio matters, and getting it wrong produces a product that either doesn't work or actively makes things worse. Too much beeswax and the salve becomes brittle. It sets hard. It cracks off the skin instead of staying in contact with it, and you've lost your occlusive barrier entirely. Too little beeswax, and you have a soft, greasy preparation that spreads everywhere, absorbs unevenly, and provides almost no meaningful barrier effect. The margin between those two failure states is narrower than you'd expect. Rebecca Lapp's preparation notes are specific. Roughly 1 part beeswax to 4 parts rendered lard by weight. Not by volume, weight. That distinction matters because beeswax and lard have different densities, and measuring by volume introduces enough variation to push the formula outside its functional range. 1 to 4, by weight. Tested across multiple generations in the Baylor and Lapp households, refined through direct observation of outcomes on real skin in real winter conditions. This is not a recipe that was theorized in a laboratory. It is a recipe that was calibrated against cracked hands and split heels and bleeding knuckles until it worked every single time. If you're wondering how that's even legal, meaning how the commercial skincare industry can sell petroleum-based occlusives as the standard of care when a 2-ingredient farm preparation outperforms them in real-world conditions, so is everyone else. The answer, to the extent there is one, involves regulatory capture, marketing budgets measured in the hundreds of millions, and a consumer culture that was trained over decades to associate complexity with efficacy. More ingredients, more steps, more products, more spending. The simplicity of the Amish formula is, from a commercial standpoint, a liability. You cannot build a subscription model around lard and beeswax. You cannot sell a 12-step routine when 2 ingredients solve the problem on the first night. The formula didn't fail the market. The market failed the formula. The wax itself has to be right. This is the caveat that matters, the same way the rendering process matters for the lard. Raw, unbleached beeswax. Not the white cosmetic-grade pellets sold in craft stores. Not the bleached blocks that have been processed to remove color and odor for aesthetic reasons. The bleaching process strips out the beneficial compounds, the propolis residues, the antimicrobial flavonoids, the minor constituents that give raw beeswax its biological activity. What you have left after bleaching is structurally similar to unbleached wax, but functionally, it is a different material. You lose the antimicrobial effect. You lose the minor anti-inflammatory activity. You are left with a thickener that does one thing, where the raw material did 3. The Amish sourced their beeswax from their own hives, or from neighboring farms they knew personally. They knew the bees. They knew what the bees had been foraging on. They knew the wax had not been processed beyond the most basic straining to remove debris. This is the chain of custody that made the formula what it was. And it is the chain of custody that is almost impossible to replicate through commercial supply channels, where raw materials pass through multiple intermediaries before they reach the end user, and where the processing decisions made at each step are invisible to the person who eventually applies the product to their skin. The same formula that built the Baylor Salve's reputation across 3 counties in Pennsylvania, the same preparation that Rebecca Lapp's neighbors were asking for by name, that was being passed hand to hand through the community as the thing you used when nothing else worked, was about to destroy it. Not because the formula changed, because the world around it did. It heals what hands cannot say. The old salve recipe still works today.